Welcome to the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Green, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change. All right, awesome. Good morning, everybody. I am Alex Green, and I'm here in Boulder, Colorado, like I always am. And I am connecting today with Jenny Hayes. Jenny is in Madison, Wisconsin, where I used to live, and that's where we spent some time together there. And Jenny and I are going to be talking about somatic experiencing, something that we both share in our practices, and we'll talk about that. And then a special focus on wilderness therapy, which is a big component of Jenny's powerful work. So just a little bit about Jenny specifically. So she is a licensed clinical social worker, somatic experiencing practitioner, EMDR practitioner, yoga teacher, probably a bunch of other things by now in her training and career. And she owns and runs a private practice called Wandering Within Wellness, based out of the Corey Arts building in West Madison. And let's see. So Jenny, you and I met in, I think it was 2014 when our somatic experiencing cohort began in St. Paul. I don't think we knew one another until we met at the training, but we had those 2 years in St. Paul, and then for our final advanced year. And so we were, there, I think there was maybe one other or a couple other Wisconsin-based SEPs, but not many. We were pretty early. And then, you had the inspiration to, hey, let's bring a cohort, a somatic experiencing teacher to Madison. So we kind of worked together to find Dee and get the first program launched in Madison in 2019. And now you're into the second one. Isn't that true?
Yeah. I just wrapped up this past weekend, beginning year module 3. So there's the next cohort wrapped up the first year. So it was exciting.
It's growing. So it's growing and expanding. And so, now I think, what I remember is you and I were sitting around and thinking, this is really great. We were all jazzed about our work but like, we need more of us. And so somehow that was able to happen, which is great. Anyway, so Jenny, thank you so much for taking time to be here today.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Awesome. Yeah, good to see you too. Let's, so I want to talk about SE. I want to talk about your practice. I want to talk about the wilderness component, which is such an interest of mine, to hear from you in what and how that weaves in. And some other things, but I wonder if we could just kind of go into, just your own background, going back into your, formative years, or what are the influences that led you to therapy and yoga and ultimately somatic therapies. What's your story?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think a big piece of the equation here is I grew up in a really large family. So I'm the 12th kid in a family of 15 kiddos. And I think just naturally growing up in community and really just experiencing what that means what it means to have mentors within your family that are at different ages, going through different life experiences. So you're seeing things like childbirth among your siblings and marriages and some of the hardships in life just kind of happening in the fabric of life around you and in the vastness of this rich community. So as a kid who was always pretty sensitive and an observer, I was just curious, just like curious about all these things going on and how it's all connected, and just, I think always have had an affinity for people and for like the joys and the sorrows of humanity and just how that arise. And just, I don't know. I think I think curiosity is the main culprit here, actually. I think I just
Okay.
was like, what's going
You
on?
were
There's a
too
whole lot
curious. You
going on
had to know
here.
more.
You know, and
Yeah.
where does this come from and where does it go to and how does it all work together? And
Right.
I think that was my initial curiosity. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I don't, where did you grow up? In Wisconsin or somewhere else?
No, I grew up in Wisconsin, just outside of
Hmm.
Milwaukee.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
most
so,
people will assume I grew up like on a farm or something. They hear large family and, but
yeah,
I grew
that's
up actually in a pretty urban area and um, my family had a family business and, everyone lived
amazing.
actually
That's
pretty
so funny.
close.
That's a part of your story I didn't know. My mom is one of 11 and I thought that was a big
Oh,
family, but 12th out of 15. Wow.
yeah.
That is a large family. That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I know, and I think did you do your psychotherapy? Did you do your training at UW
I
Madison?
did. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I did my
Yeah.
undergrad actually in lacrosse and then my graduate studies in Madison.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Um, in terms of, so you were curious about humans. And so, was psychotherapy just an obvious fit, in terms of, uh, that
Yeah.
approach or?
Yeah, I remember sitting in a high school psychology class, and I even have some friends who still remember this moment where I just sat back and I was like, "This is it. This is it." Like,
Yeah.
okay, this is how you do this whole studying of humans thing,
Got
So,
it.
I leaned into it, and I think as I went along, psychotherapy became just something that continued to highlight itself.
Right.
I think the journey to the first part of my career was with children, and I
Mm.
worked primarily with kiddos who had a trauma background. And
Mm.
um, I would say that's where I started to recognize the importance of the body
Okay.
and
Okay.
the fact that, kids can verbalize a lot, but also their behaviors are the way that they're communicating so much of
Mm.
what's going on.
I
And
see.
my curiosity started to shift from this mind-based way of understanding people
Yeah.
into much more of a curiosity about what's going on inside there. Like
Mm.
what's the story that doesn't quite have words yet, or
Mm.
what's happening and where is it landing?
Mm.
And I really feel like my work with kids started to introduce that to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What, s- um, and so then what led you specifically to, the SE training? I mean, there's Hakomi, there's sensory motor psychotherapy.
Yeah.
How did you sort of, as you it sounds like you became curious in the embodied aspects of trauma or even just people. Yeah. What kind of pulled you in towards SE specifically?
Yeah. I actually didn't know a whole lot about it. And then at one point I had a book in my house. I still to this day don't know how the heck it got in my house, but it was Peter Levine's Healing Trauma. And it was this small little book. And I remember being pregnant with my oldest son and
Mm.
sitting on the couch and reading it. And as I was reading it, things started happening inside of me. I remember turning to my husband and being like, I'm going to close this book right now because
Right.
some things are happening and I don't know what's happening, but this feels really powerful. And I think something in me knew, hey, maybe now in life isn't the time to open this book and take
Right.
the journey. But after my son was born, and in those days of breastfeeding and rocking and being with and the slowing down of life, I started to read more of Peter's work, and in an unspoken voice,
Mm.
I started to really dive into it. And again, I got those experiences in my own body of like something's happening inside
Mm.
as I'm reading this. And it felt like tectonic plates in my self were
Mm.
shifting, right?
Mm.
And I just knew that there was something here. Like something felt like home. Something felt
Mm.
like it landed. And um, the curiosity was there again, as it always has been. And so I just kept leaning in, and
Yeah.
I found my way there. And I think that's when we met in St. Paul.
Right. Yeah. It's funny. It was in an unspoken voice also for me also. I don't really know how I came across it, but I did. And then it spoke to a lot of things that I was kind of seeing in body work where as somebody relaxed, some movement might start to express, but along with that movement there might be, a memory or something. And when I went to St. Paul, it was funny because I read the book and I was like, wow, that seems like a really great explanatory model. But I couldn't figure out, the book didn't explain at all, like how the therapy works. It was just sort of like we're humans are animals. This is what happened.
Yeah.
And I was like, but like how? I don't get how. And so it was funny. I went to the St. Paul training and I didn't think I was going to do everything. I was just like, well, I'm going to go to the 4-day module 1. At least I'll know sort of kind of how it works. And that was as far as my curiosity went at that point. But anyway, I was blown away enough to be in for the whole ride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why we're doing that.
Well, so let's, for people who are listening who, SE is somatic experiencing, something I talk about not infrequently, on this podcast. But for somebody who doesn't know what it is at all, let's take a moment just to give just a little bit of, what it is. And let's have you do that. Imagine, you're with a new client and you're going to explain doing that one thing you'd like to include as a somatic experiencing lens or something. Well, what's your, minute or two explanation of, what it's all about?
Yeah. Yeah, I think keeping it to a minute or two is always a little tricky, but I'm going to do my best.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I think that, I like to talk about it in terms of slowing down so that we can hear the narrative of the body. That when we go through life, we're going through experiences, and our mind is such an important part of that journey, but that, there's a way in which our body is having an experience, and, pending the degree to which something is happening in our life, that our body's brilliant and it's going to respond in absolutely brilliant ways. And some of those ways are designed to keep us safe and protect us, and to keep some sense of balance so we can keep moving forward. But that those pieces that maybe didn't have an opportunity to be tended to, that needed to be protected, also have a really important part of the picture that helps us to move forward in a way where we can feel the fullness of life. Sometimes there's ways that the things that happen can narrow our experience as humans. And in order to have the fullness of our life force, it's really important to slow down and to get curious about what the body's narrative is around what it's gone through, and how can we support it to move through whatever cycles it needs to that it didn't have an opportunity to. To allow for that. And I think that slowing down in the culture that we live in is a really challenging thing to do in this fast-paced world. And so to create and carve out spaces where there can be enough relational safety and a pace that allows for that story to come forward, and with it sometimes some challenging aspects of the story. And how can we use somatic skills to create the support, the container, and the nurturing that we need in order to digest and metabolize what didn't have an opportunity to do.
I like that.
That's a bit of it. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because when I'm talking with new folks and I often end up conveying, it's like, well, it's not that there's not talking. There is talking. We're talking about, your nervous system, your experience of sensation, even how that connects to emotion, so it's not that there's not talking, but there's also very much not only talking. There's sort of something else that's very much there. Um, how would you, again, for somebody trying to get the feeling of, how, I love that, the body narrative but when we're in a slowed down, I love that phrase, SE session. What does it mean to, that we're not just having a conversation, we're also attuning and connecting to sensation and the body felt sense. And how do you kind of describe that piece of it?
Yeah, sometimes I talk about it like relearning. It can feel like a foreign language that's actually like deeply embedded, that we're just uncovering again to use language that describes what's happening inside the body. And so, I'll talk about it in terms of like, there might be a moment where you're telling me a story about work, and I might notice that things are lighting up all over the place, right, in your body. And if we don't slow down, we miss an opportunity. And so it might just be, hey, can we pause here? Can we take a moment?
Yeah.
It seems like something's happening as you're
Right.
talking about this. Where might that be in your body?
Yeah. When you say, is somebody sharing and now they're talking about something about work and things are lighting up all over the place and you can perceive that. Well, what's what are some of the ways that you might perceive somebody's, a nervous system changing, or there's something active that you want to linger on to bring out somatically? What's the kind of thing you might observe?
Yeah, so I'm looking for, I think this is like in the somatic training, what they really talk about is developing your SEIs, right? And looking for things like, I'll often see changes in how someone's eyes look, whether that be the brightness or the way in which they're presenting. Sometimes it can be a leaning in of posture. Sometimes there's lots of movement in the hands that are showing up. Sometimes the breathing, you can sense a breathing, or oftentimes bracing patterns. So maybe a tightening in the arms, or, a change in the tone of voice. Sometimes seeing, color changes on the face and the skin, and I think, really helping people to recognize like, like when we slow down, it's like, oh my gosh, I just went from like 0 to 20 in like 10 seconds talking about this thing, and everything in my, chemistry here has changed. And so, it's also using my body as a resource, right? So when you're in the resonance with a client, sometimes it's actually really subtle. Maybe it's something that I'm noticing that's happening in the resonance that has me changing posture or position, or a sense of more activation in the room, or a sense where everything goes really quiet and it feels like maybe a little foggy, right? Like that. Sometimes in that, it's questioning, like, I'm sensing something in the room and I'm wondering if you might be feeling a quality in here. And so it shows up in a lot of different ways. And I think as I've done SE longer, fine tuning the nuance in that has become much more available to me.
Yeah. No, I love that. Well, one of my favorite things is like, is just, when we do slow down and we pay attention, it's always amazing with clients how much there is to notice. And it's like, an example I often use is doing, just a couple of breaths. And, a lot of us are used to, we might go to a yoga class for 50 minutes. We've been doing Ujjayi breathing or something, which is, so you would think, okay, hopefully if I've done 45 minutes of meditation or, of a special breathing, I would hope I would feel something. But what I like to point out in an SC session is like, okay, we may pause, just, orient ground, sort of the big, and then, let's just take a couple easy breaths, just a nice slow breath in, easy breath out, do it at your speed. And this is how I start with a lot of people. And I say, and then just notice for yourself, like, did your body kind of like those breaths, or was it a little stressful, or was it just neutral? What was the feeling? And is there any change afterwards? Or if the thing's the same, what's, you just did 3 breaths. Now what are you noticing?
Mm-hmm.
And almost inevitably, I mean, it's only 3 breaths and we breathe all day long, but somehow by doing something a little slower,
Mm-hmm.
by paying attention to the cause and effect. So I did something, breathing in this case, and then I'm watching, tracking, as we call it in SE,
Mm-hmm.
how much there is to observe. And so I think that like people quickly, what I like about SE is that it is a little hard to explain, but as soon as you get into it,
Yeah.
it's super intuitive. People
Right.
love noticing sensations in their body and making connections. It becomes so easy in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think, there's what I love about SE is just how many doorways in there
Mm.
are, so
Yeah.
many different ways you can lean into it. And if
Mm.
somebody isn't finding, SE to be their jam, which, hey, that
Right.
happens too, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But there's usually a doorway that speaks to them,
Mm.
and so maybe the doorway is, feeling a squishy ball, and feeling sensation out here,
Mm.
before we go here,
Right. Right.
and so it's so, and I love that example of just taking the breaths, right? Of noticing the nuance of the change so
Mm.
presently when it slows down
Mm.
that we're bypassing most of the day, right? Like
Right.
we're
We're
breathing on,
overlooking.
right? But
Right.
there's so much richness in it when you get familiar
Mm.
with it and you form a relationship with
Yeah. Super cool. Well, so here's a question for you because, I've lived in Colorado. So, you and I haven't been able to connect the pandemic, right? So
it.
it's been a while. So here's a question that I have for you is we are what, I don't know, 7 years past our, training or whatever, when we became SCPs. And so I'm curious for you, like at this stage of your practice, what are some of the key SE principles or frameworks that that you find yourself leaning into a lot? I mean, you're already referencing some through attunement and slowing down,
Mhm.
but yeah, what other sort of aspects of SE do what's different about how you're working now than 6, 7 years ago? Maybe that's a better question.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. I think, I would say that what's much more present for me now is recognizing the power of resourcing
Mm.
and reaching for the elements that support the system. I think sometimes I talk to clients about, and, I remind myself about this, that, it's like if you were to be standing at a trailhead and you look one way and it's a path that has a lot of like craggy, like rock and slimy things, and you got to kind of crawl over boulders, and it's going to be a little dark and mucky and intense, and
Right.
you're not quite sure if you have the right footwear because it's a little dicey in there, right? And but there's a feeling of like, I got to go through there, right, to get
Yeah.
to the other side. And then you look at the other trail and you notice it's this prairie with all of these butterflies and these sweet flowers, and and the reality is that you actually can get to the other side of the trail by choosing either of those. And I think earlier in my
Mm.
career and in the work, I felt like in order to really work with what needed to be supported, I had to go down that path towards the intensity, towards the magnetic pull of the trauma vortex. Really,
Right.
the trauma vortex and the counter vortex are terms in SE, as you
Right.
know, and one speaks to where a lot of the activation and the woundedness lie, and the other speaks to the very elements that help us have the capacity to turn towards some of those pieces. And I think in the way I work now, I spend a lot more time in the prairie. I'm spending
Mm.
a lot more time gathering the flowers and the resources, and really deepening the stabilizing of the system. And in our culture, I think in the world we live in, sometimes it's like you get in there, you get it done, you move quick, come on, heal that on up. And I think that we're not as supported to turn toward rather the awe and the beauty and the wonder and the very things that allow our capacity to have the ripest conditions for healing. And so I would say it's the slowing down and the resourcing that that feel really powerful. And I think also that idea of titrating, like
Right.
moving towards that trauma vortex, but in a very titrated, well-resourced way.
Yeah.
And that feels like it's really been pivotal. And also, I think a part of where I've leaned into the ecotherapy side of things, because it feels like a very strong resource-rich area of the work.
I love that. Yeah, no, that framing is, it's so beautifully said, and I resonate with it so much too. And I feel like I just keep we learned that. It's like I feel like there's just been these stages where I learned it more and more powerfully, where I sometimes like Steve Hoskinson's. I did one of my trainings with him, and he calls the counter vortex blue, so just arbitrary, and vortex red, so blue and red, and so just this idea of supporting and nurturing blue, or finding the blue even within a red or a activating situation, and I just year by year, I feel like I come to that belief more and more. It's like, to the extent that we can um, uh, get the collaboration with our clients, that doing a lot of work around of establishing resource, connecting, feeling the reestablishing the ability to feel pleasure, to feel expansion, to be able to imagine the things that are fulfilling and nurturing, and to take those in. And from one view, that can sort of feel like toxic positivity, or bypassing or something. But what I like to explain is that no, we're really building up our neurobiological capacity to experience expansion. And then it's not as though there's not value in processing the activation and the trauma. But if there's first this, if we got a good ball of steam, or, this got a lot of the blue resource energy, it's so much easier and so much pleasurable. And it's always amazing how something that seemed like it was going to be like the scariest, nastiest thing to have to work through, by the time, if there's no rush to get there and you're coming in with a lot of resource, it can unfold so undramatically sometimes. It's at least how I'm experiencing it. I wonder what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, I think about, if we think about leaning into the resource, like really truly filling up that backpack, it's like you might then be on the trail that's a little bit more challenging, and remember that you have a flower in your backpack, and that just by rubbing it, something changes, right? Like, just like, hey, this helps me be here. This helps me be here. And I think when we bring the stress chemistry down, right? When we're able to bring the stress chemistry down in the body, we're able to stay online enough to metabolize the pieces that are more challenging. But if our stress chemistry is so high, we run the risk of, utilizing the very same protective mechanisms and patterns of activation in the body that had to keep us safe in the first place. And so I really value the way that I like the blue. That's fun. I really value how the stress chemistry gets to be lowered so that we can really be there in the work in a more safe way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love
You know,
that.
it's funny. I have a somewhat timely example that was a little powerful. I'll just speak in very
Yeah.
broad terms, but it was working with someone, and with a fairly with a birth trauma, have medical, a very challenging birth, almost dying and things like that, and then set this, in a way, then had a ripple effect through that intensity of a birth trauma had a significant effect on going forward. Um, and and something interesting came up in one conversation where we tracked back somatically, and this person doesn't have a conscious memory of that time, but a felt, certainly knows the story, and there's a felt sense, and knows some of the medical details of the life-saving measures and things like that. And when we did that and slow, we kind of tracked back and held it in a very slow way, and something came forward from the client where um, where they recognized something that they had never really thought about, was the over and aboveness that one of the physicians
Mhm.
did that wasn't automatic, and somehow feeling into that this sort of human element, somehow this person had the physician had done beyond the call of duty, and it had turned, and that had made the difference, and that was an overlooked sort of part of the narrative, yet when connected to, just created this enormous expansion around the situation. So that one just sort of came to mind as sort of, again, so this idea of, even very difficult situations, car accidents, it's like, are there, where's the blue, where's the resource, even within challenge, is something that I think about.
Right. And I love that. I love that example. And I would imagine, I don't know, I mean, you were in that resonance, but I would imagine, the other work that needed to be looked at,
Mhm.
was much more manageable because that resource was there to lean into.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's the beauty of this work. I mean, what an honor. I think
Mm.
it's such an honor to be in presence with
Mm.
clients who are bringing these stories and trusting in that space, right, for their system to be held and supported. And yeah, just listening to your story, I felt touched in that way of,
Mm.
what a beautiful thing that someone knew that there was this space that they could enter
Mm.
into, and to even explore that piece that might have been missing was there all along. And how cool, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's so cool. I love that.
Yeah. Um, so, so I'd love to hear a little bit about, about wandering within wellness, and, you've been, in group practices for a while, and I think
Yeah.
this is a new venture, and I'd love to hear, uh, the guiding vision. What's happening there?
Yeah, it's bringing together a few different areas that have been existing kind of on their own in different spheres
Uh-huh.
under one umbrella. And I'm still doing quite a bit of somatic experiencing, psychotherapy based sessions, but another avenue of the practice is really starting to delve more into ecotherapy groups and retreats. I've done retreats for a few years now, primarily with other therapists or others in the caretaking professions, and
Hmm.
really creating opportunities to work um, on, finding ways to really nourish nervous systems that are definitely extending to, broaden out to humanity in really powerful ways. And how do we slow down and nourish and take
Mm.
time to receive the vital nutrients that are needed to continue to
Mm.
do the work.
Mm.
So that's the retreat side of things, and it's been fun, and it's been great to collaborate with other people to do retreats. And So that's been exciting. And I think the ecotherapy side of things is a little bit newer and probably the oldest at the same time, right?
Right.
Something that's been in my life for a very long time, well before I knew what it was or what to call it or why it felt important. And now putting language around something that's been really meaningful for a long time and wanting to offer that and create more space and opportunity for that.
Super cool. So yeah, I'd love to hear, I guess I have a couple thoughts. One is, did you gravitate to any particular, have you done any specific study around that? Is there any model that you've really sort of appreciated how they frame things? Or maybe they'll just start with that question, just if you've kind of pursued some training in that direction.
Definitely. I've definitely pursued some training. I've done some ecotherapy certification through the Earth Body Institute and the Kamana program through the Wilderness Awareness School when that was still, when the program was still up and running, which is more of like a naturalist training. I would say my hero, I was listening to her this morning just because anytime I listen to her, something in my being lights up and everything. And it just, something really magical happens. But Joanna Macy and the work that, reconnects is really been a teacher of mine. And, I highly encourage anyone who's interested in this beautiful earth that we're living on and sustainability and the life-giving nourishment of being in a reciprocal relationship with it to turn towards her work. She's really inspiring. So I would say reading, a lot of her writings have touched me deeply and have given language again around something that's been so felt for so long. And I really found a groundedness in finding her work.
Right. Yeah. I love that term reciprocal relationship. And unpack that a little bit. What does that mean? And why is it important? Tell us about that reciprocity. Yeah.
I think, and I can just speak for myself that, for a long time it would be, I'm having a hard day or I'm having a hard time. I'm going to go on a walk, and I'm going to, and surely I'm going to be in the forest and I'm going to get all these messages and now there's going to be meaning and I'm going to settle and I'm going to, and that was all true and it still is. Right. But I think that, as I've really felt into, I think as I've done, my own work and I've worked, with people for so long in these really subtle and nuanced places, really recognizing that when I step, into the natural world, I'm among many, many beings and that we're all a part of this greater web of life and that we, are here to support, nourish, and listen and be in relationship with one another. And that, when I go out now, it's really saying hello. It's asking for permission. It's slowing down to notice if there's any way that I can support, the trees or the plants around me. There's this way that, there's me and there's you and we're here at the same time. And what a gift to be here together at the same time. But there's not, I think there was, years past, there was more of a brazenness, right? Or there was more of quality maybe of like taking, right? Or a quality of like going there to get something. And now it's more of I want to go visit my friends and I want to see how they're doing too. And I want to slow down and I want to notice what they want me to see and how I might be able to support that. And when I'm hugging a tree, it's not, it's not like, oh, I'm hugging you and you're making me feel better. It's like, hey, I'm in me and I'm feeling you and you. And like, we're here together at the same time. And like, this hug is as much for you as it is for me. And, and it's been important for me to learn, the names of things, you know, like when you know something, when you know, when you have a name for something, you, for me, it's been like dandelion's my friend, you know, like, like
You know more.
I
It's
know you, like, I don't
you
want to,
don't
like, I wouldn't
overlook
want
as
to,
much. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like, it's just, you know, like Hawthorne is a teacher, you know, what a
Mm,
guy,
mm,
what an ally, you know,
mm,
so there's, it feels really beautiful. It's been
mm.
really beautiful, and I feel really invited to continue to talk about this with clients that are interested, because, you know, I think there can be a great forgetting, and it's important to have a great remembering.
Yeah, yeah. I love that phrase. Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, and yeah. So I really like this idea of uh, creating spaces for relationships to be built. And
Yeah. So wonderful. I mean, relationships, you look at healing models for a person, even within oneself, I like the healing, I like the relationship model of IFS about healing relationships within the person. But then of course, so much of work and therapy and psychotherapy often is about our connection with, those close to us, right? Our friends or our family of origin. I mean, so much of repair or attending to is about relationships um, and I like how you're widening the framework beyond people to, our earth as habitat, but not in the abstract, but in the specific of the other beings, and that we can be in relationship with in the way you're describing.
yeah, yeah, you know, Alex, this is reminding me, and I don't know if you'll remember this. I'll
Yeah.
be intrigued if you do. I don't remember at what point it was in our training, but there was
Yeah.
one day in our training where um, we were in a practice triad together,
Right.
actually.
I remember this, by the way. I know what you're going to
Okay.
say. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Keep going. Keep
Yeah.
going.
And I remember, I think you came in and it was just, I don't even know what we were learning about or what was happening, but I remembered you came in and you were just kind of like, we were landing as a group. You were talking
Yeah.
about, you were reading the news that morning or listening to something, and you named that you were listening to how the Great Barrier Reef was dying.
Right.
And I remembered, just, it struck me so intensely. And
Yeah.
I remembered being, I think, you know, the lender or the person that was the
Right.
client, and just going into a deep grief around that. And I would say that definitely landed in that curiosity cup of mine around, oh, like what happened back there? That
Right.
the
Right.
naming of that and the idea, it felt like something very connected, like just a grief that I didn't know existed for the earth. And that eco grief exploration since then has been really
Yep.
profound. And so in many ways, I don't know if I have ever thanked you, but I really do want to thank you. There was something really pivotal for me in you bringing that in that day at that time, and that my system had
Yeah.
some capacity to work with that because of the healing nature of the work. But
Yeah.
powerful moment.
No, I know. I appreciate you that bringing it up, and no, I remembered too um, because I think this was a shared resonance moment. Because I mean, you're right. We were on a break. I
Yeah.
happened to read the news.
Yeah.
I happened to read a depressing article about the Great Barrier Reef,
Yeah.
bleaching, and something, and in a lot of days, sure, that would have bummed me out. But there was something about being in where we were paying so much attention to, impact, and it was just like, and so, I think we started up our class again, and then it was just sort of like a check-in, and like, well, that's what was on my field because I had just read this thing, and I remember how, like, how I was moved and you were moved, and it's like, I think it was because we were all slowed down in that way,
Right.
that we were observing what that impact was. But no, that really stood out as a pivotal thing in my own experience as well. So yeah, no, and we've never talked about it, so I'm
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm glad you remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, what you talked about earlier about IFS and relationship
Yeah.
with self is that, um, I think deepening relationship with self and trust in your capacity to show up for yourself is what leads to the deepening, is an element at least that leads to your capacity to deepen relationship with other, right? Like if we're not in relationship with ourselves,
Mm.
it's really challenging to be an authentic and vulnerable and deep relationship with others.
Mm.
And I think that's, it's been my experience that the deeper I've gone into that work, individually, the ability to deepen into that relationship
Mm.
in the more than human world has only
Mm. Mm.
been much more deeply possibility.
So cool. So with your clients, and the retreats, and what's a way, and I love that phrase, there can be a forgetting, but there can be a great remembering, which really resonates with me. I'm not going to go into the whole story, but like, but that happened for, like, for, I'll share it really briefly, but when I was a kid, um, my parents were divorced, and so we didn't live most of the time with my dad. But when we did, everything was nature based, for a period of our, and he lived in beautiful places. He lived in Vancouver Island, and he lived in the Canadian Rockies for a period, and then he moved to Hawaii. And so I was growing up in the Midwest, and living a good life and all that. And but then when I would visit, my sister and I would visit my father, we would do a lot of immersive nature experiences that were also sort of novel. And this is all around like age 6, 7, 8, 9, kind of in that range. And a great awakening for me at some point as an adult was to recognize how just deeply pivotal those times were for me, and in ways that I forgot. I went on to do education and do other things, but I had a great remembering where I remembered how unbelievably connected to landscape and nature, and how powerful those times were for me. And I had sort of kind of forgotten it, and then brought it forward again. So that's sort of kind of part of why I resonate with that language. But but I'd love to hear with your clients doing ecotherapy, like, is some of it there in your office? Is that part of it? Is some of it going out? Is it retreat based? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in terms of the office, there's often invitations to orient to the natural world.
Okay.
So inviting clients to position themselves in a way where they might be able to see out a window, and, work with nature as a possible resource.
Yep.
And, there might be things in my office like feathers or, things that they can touch or things that they can smell,
Right.
that brings that a bit more in.
Hmm.
Often invitations to talk about, the natural world and places that are very special, and really feeling into, the felt sense of that and what happens in the body when you think about that tree or that place or that moment with that crow,
Mm.
and what happens inside when that pops up as something.
Mm.
And then when it's in person, I tend to really enjoy group work, and lean more into group work. And I think that, I think there's an element of, again, growing up in a big family where, being in the group container and being in that, that resonance is such a powerful space where being witnessed and being seen and, being in shared moment with others can be so powerful. So in groups, it's, often really slowing down to get in touch somatically so that we create the conditions for a deeper resonance. We create conditions where a deeper listening can happen. There might be a very gentle and subtle question that we take with us, and really just allowing your senses to really guide you to feel the call, maybe from a being, and it might really surprise you. It might be a stone. It might be it might be like where somebody's footprint went into mud, and there's something about that's just really speaking to whatever that question is that you're holding in your heart as you're walking forward. And it's, invitations to get really curious about that, and not in a way where our mind has to decide what it means, but in a way where we slow down to see what wants to arrive. And recognizing that, our psyches are deeply connected to the psyches of the earth, and that the natural processes that we go through as humans are shared in the more than human world, and that there's grief and there's loss and there's expansion and there's joy and there's flow and there's stagnation, and there's all of these things that we're sharing, and that we can mirror that and we can be with that in a different way. Sometimes it's easier to be with our own grief when we're seeing, a leaf that's falling, and something about that feels like, well, that feels natural. Does the tree miss that leaf? I don't know, but something about that feels, it feels like it's in resonance with what I'm feeling right now. And, really recognizing that I think that, when, planetary wellness and our wellness is a really big part of the puzzle and moving forward in this life-sustaining way. And how can we support each other in those processes?
Yeah, well said. What I'm curious, are there places that you're, so in terms of some of your retreats and are there places that you return to? Are there places where you have a connection, or where you do a lot of this work now?
Yeah, there's a few spots. I do a retreat at the Christine Center every year, and
which is is it outside of Eau Claire or something like that?
Yeah. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful setting. And there's, I've had some really wonderful experiences there many years ago. And one of the sisters there who had a big part to play in creating the trails was somebody whose path I crossed at a time where it was really meaningful for me. And going back and recognizing the shared love for something, and really honoring of the land that you can feel the touch of her in. She's now passed, and it's a beautiful place that that just feels like home. It feels really, really wonderful. I'd recommend they do many retreats. They're lovely to work with. And food is delicious. So I go there yearly. And then in terms of, I like to do a lot of things pretty locally where it's accessible for people, so a lot of the conservancies around Madison, and of course the Arboretum, and, Holy Wisdom Monastery, there's just beautiful trails. And I think that, it's also really important to recognize that sitting in your backyard, right? Like you could sitting on a deck, having just one little patch of grass. There's so much happening in that doesn't necessarily have to be going out and going somewhere, but it's how do we deepen relationship with the places that we're walking by every day? But yeah, those are a few of my
Mm.
those thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, super cool. It's funny that I had one sort of dramatic experience once where kind of relating to the difference of being, you know, having the direct connection to, the natural world. And it was after I had been doing my bodywork private practice for a number of years at the Bedford Square building in the near west side of Madison. And I loved my space. And it was like an interior room, so there were no windows, which was sort of a downside. There were some upsides because it was kind of quiet, and it was great. I loved the container of my space there. But nevertheless, you wouldn't argue that unless you're consciously extending into the natural world, it's not sort of right there in your face, right? Um, and then I can't remember what it was. I think somebody asked me, I had reason to go out to Spring Green, Wisconsin, where about an hour west of Madison, where my dad and stepmom live, and they have a little meditation center there. And somebody had asked for some body work. And so I went out there, and it was like a fall day. It was like early September or something. And it was so beautiful just outside, and there were no bugs or anything. So we were like, let's do this outside. Why not? Right. And it was like there wasn't sun so we just set up, and no one was there. Like there was no one there. So kind of, rural. So, pretty remote, and ended up doing our session. And actually, now that I'm remembering, it was a trade. So it was somebody I was practicing with. So we each did it. It took a few hours because we had enough time. And when I was the receiver, so when I was getting even when I was the body worker, but especially when I was the receiver, it was just amazing. From the breeze and the smells and the subtle sounds and and birds and it wasn't like I was sitting there analyzing my environment. It was much more of just like, wow, like there is I'm in such a big space with so much going on, and I'm receiving a body work session, and yet I'm in relationship with all of this around me. And it was a little tough because it was like, I would wish for always having that kind of a container afterwards. But I guess that's the good thing about memory, right? Like one aspect of resourcing is these peak experiences and these memories, which we can bring with us in a way. But anyway, I thought of that.
That one's in your resource backpack.
That one's in my resource backpack. It's just hanging out there. Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Totally. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, is there anything else that's in terms of your ongoing unfolding, and I love the integration of SE and the wilderness perspective, and I'm learning some great terms. I love the phrase "more than human world" and being in a reciprocal relationship. But yeah, anything else about sort of kind of as you're unfolding that's alive for you?
Yeah. I'm reflecting on something. We had spoke, I don't know, maybe about a month ago, just a bit about what we might want to talk about here. And I think at one point you asked the question, like, I'm getting a whiff of maybe something a little spiritual, Jenny. And I remembered at the moment, I was like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to talk about that. And so I've been really sitting with that. I've been really sitting with that, like, oh, I wonder what that resistance was.
Right.
Really slow down.
Right.
Because, to be completely fair, that's an extremely important part of this process for me. For how I arrive and how I walk in this world. And for the leaning into this work and we're never doing this work alone. We're never doing this work alone. And so there's a lot that I lean into, and there's a lot of support that I nourish in my life spiritually to be walking in a way that I can be authentic as someone who holds space for healing. And there's always been something spiritual for me in the natural world ever since
Right.
being a kiddo. There was just something about this greater web that was always felt, and that, I was raised Catholic and gained a lot from that. And also my experience traveling the world and being in many different cultures and falling in love with different world religions and the beauty and the sacredness, that there's so much that I honor. And so I found it funny that I was resistant to something that is actually so very nourishing in this
Right.
way. And
and I think part of the way I phrased that question was, for you, what's the place? Is there a space for spirituality within a psychotherapy context? Both in terms of, as clients are navigating their interpersonal, intrapersonal, and maybe spiritual relationships. And I think that was a little bit the spirit of my question, is how you hold that in your work.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing, a bit of your, of what you carry with you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I think a friend of mine recently who's starting her own practice talked about looking into all of the definitions of psychology. She was doing a deep dive into all the definitions. And the one that really struck her was the study of soul. Psychology is the study of soul. And I really, you feel that in the work. You feel that there's something really powerful and beautiful. And the more that I leave space for that in my own life without having to label it or call it any one thing, but just the welcoming and the invitation and the being with, it's, you can feel that in the room, and welcoming and inviting a client's experience. And it does feel like there's soul. There's a soulfulness in the room. Right?
Soulfulness. I love that. It reminds me a little bit of I'm guessing, I'm assuming you've read Menachem's My Grandmother's Hands, and my favorite thing about that book is that he's an SEP and has done so much around looking at the embodiment of racism, and I love that early in the book he does like this 1-page explanation of polyvagal theory, and what I like so much about it, he kind of does a couple paragraphs that are sort of like the neurobiology, and then he's like, for our purposes, I'm just going to call that the soul nerve. And that was it. And it was like end of sentence. And I was so impressed by that. It was just sort of like, all right, forget now, from here on out, it's the soul nerve. And I was just like, wow, like what a great way to just bring it into something, tangible and felt. So anyway, I was thinking of that.
I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's so much soul, I think, we can't, and people can define soul differently. That's fine. There's a million different ways to relate to, what that means for a person. And, but to acknowledge that that's, part of, that's who we're working with, I think is important. Yeah. Super cool. Jenny, this has been a real pleasure. It makes me realize, even it might only be every couple of years that we get to talk to one another, but I feel enriched every time that I do. So thanks so much.
Absolutely. I'm so glad our paths crossed again. And, again, thank you for being another Scani in the room at that initial training.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
To know you all.
Yeah, likewise. Great. Awesome. Thank you, Jenny.
All right. You take care.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.